please note the disclaimer. The best analogy I could come up with for American Dad was that it's like Family Guy's younger, politer brother, though both are just as prone to psychotic outbursts. I personally think American Dad has far more interesting, likable characters than Family Guy. I've always found it difficult to root for Lois, Meg, Chris, and Stewie, and honestly, Peter and Brian have seemed more like villains in these later seasons. But for American Dad, I never had that problem. Apart from maybe Stan, I found Roger, Klaus, Haley...
This is a peaceful protest!
Steve and Francine to be really likable characters. American Dad has had me laughing and smiling through tons of episodes. Way more than Family Guy ever did. I really like the fact that American Dad doesn't ask you to take it too seriously. I tend to find the jokes in American Dad tend to rely a lot less on shock humor.
I feel like Tara Reid on an average Tuesday!
My only gripe is when I see Stan and Francine, most of the stuff he does to her in later seasons seems more like unforgivable, horrifying travesties, such as manipulating her memories or burning her face off. He's meant to look like a well-meaning husband goofing up, but some of this stuff he does is just downright evil. It almost feels like they designed American Dad to appeal to someone a little bit more left-wing. If you haven't checked out American Dad before, these episodes might be a good place to start. But anyway, let's count down the top 10 best American Dad episodes. Number 10. The One That Got Away. American Dad pays homage to Fight Club. And it's every bit as awesome as it sounds. The episode basically has Roger chasing after himself, Brad Pitt and Edward Norton style. It's a mystery episode that is fascinating to follow as Roger tries to unravel the mystery of who Sydney is. I like the secret side of Roger we get in this episode. Sydney ends up being his gentle side and even has a secret romance with a lady we sadly don't ever see again.
I'm Judy.
I'm Sydney.
He then puts a hit on himself and tries to kill his alter ego, inadvertently realizing the problem with this. He then gets chased down by the hitman and has a conscience showdown against his alter ego. In the meantime, the entire family gets hooked on Simon, and Klaus has to make an interdimensional shift and disappear for 60 years and come back as a king. This one is truly American Dad at its best. I'd recommend it be one of the first episodes you watch. It's a good way to introduce yourself to the show.
And I have no genitals.
Number 9. The American Dad After School Special.
God, it's true! I've become one of them!
I found this one interesting, as we've all seen plenty of shows out there about people having to lose weight to stay healthy, but I've never seen one that addresses those on the other side of the coin. People who are underweight, people with eating disorders, bulimics. Stan becomes obsessed with exercising and losing weight.
Away from me! Die, calories, die!
And ends up becoming dangerously underweight. At first, you actually think that Stan's family is trying to sabotage his weight loss and that he's getting fatter, but then the show very cleverly turns the tables on you and makes you realize that Stan's got a real psychological problem.
Keep thinking you're fat no matter how skinny you get.
That's ridiculous! Look at me!
It's worse than we thought.
I know! I'm a huge tub of lard!
We're also introduced to Steve's girlfriend, Debbie. Debbie can be a little twisted, but as Steve says, it's in a good way. There's a genuine warmth and earnesty to this episode that made it a real favorite of mine. It's one of those few American Dad episodes that actually has a genuinely happy ending. And as I've mentioned before, in a show made by Seth MacFarlane, that's very refreshing. I recommend checking this one out. Number 8. Escape from Pearl Bailey. This episode is just one non-stop tornado. From start to finish, there's always something strange or interesting happening. The episode is about Steve trying to get Debbie to be school president, and using very cutthroat tactics to do it. Ranging from giving the candidates herpes, botching up their liposuction, to getting a ball to literally crap on top of them. I really like the character Debbie. I'll probably get disagreed with on this, but I don't personally think Seth creates very good female characters. They certainly don't tend to have very much depth, but I'd call Debbie an exception to this.
Aren't you pissed off? Sure, but that doesn't mean I need to stoop to their level.
Unlike Haley, Lois, Meg, and Francine, Debbie actually reminds me of real people I knew in high school. It's a real thoughtful blending of tons of high school cultures all in one episode. I'd recommend giving this one a look. Number 7. Don't look a Smith horse in the mouth.
Here we go.
The jokes in this episode are very sharp. Essentially, Stan buys a horse that Roger somehow happens to be the jockey of, and they have to try to get it to win races. And I would say the episode is worth it just for this one joke.
A full release ensures a rejuvenative rest and promotes a winning attitude.
Do me a favor and let me know when you're about to... you know.
They then transfer Stan's brain to the horse, so we get an aggressive conservative FBI agent as a horse. Weird.
Don't stop doing that. I'm gonna come to your house and kick your mom to death while you watch.
I just ended up laughing so much at this one that I had to add it to the list. Definitely worth a watch. And number 6, Camp Refugee.
Has anybody seen a Care Bear's towel? It had Luck Bear on the front. I mean, I think you call it Luck Bear because he had a clover on his chest.
In this unusual episode, Stan sends Steve to camp, not realizing it's an African refugee camp. When Stan finds out, he tries to make the most of it and turn it into a summer camp.
Welcome to Camp Refugee. By the way, this kind of fun isn't free. I'm gonna need checks from all your parents.
How can you not end up with something interesting from that premise? At the same time, we've got Roger and Francine role-playing as a domestically unsettled couple, and Steve falling in love with a cobra-strangling refugee. They then get raided by terrorists, wherein they then face off against the terrorists in a Camp Refugee Olympic event. And to deliver the final message, Stan literally stands on a soapbox to state it.
Just like the rest of the world. Shame on you.
Season 2's got some real gems, and this is a good way to start it off. I recommend checking this one out. It's a really good start to Season 2. And number 5, Moon over Isla Island.
I'm okay!
This is probably the most memorable episode in all of American Dad. Stan is scheduled to meet the dictator Juano Pequiano of the Caribbean, after Stan accidentally kills him when he chokes on a corn dog. He then gets Roger to play the dictator's role to try and fool the people. Stan then has to hastily fake Roger's assassination while he's dressed as the original dictator, but Roger decides to survive the assassination. Thus, Roger is now Supreme Dictator of the Caribbean.
First order of business is changing the name of this country. It's now called Bananarama, and the national anthem is Venus. Pedro, hit it! Now dance!
And he, of course, has enormous fun with his new power. The simple concept of this episode is what drives it. Just put Roger as the role of a dictator of a country, and you get very interesting results. Every joke just clicks in this episode. I can jump to any part of it, and I'll laugh. This is among the most polished scripts American Dad ever does. With brilliant chemistry between Roger and Stan, and a very funny finish, this is definitely among the top 10 episodes. Number 4. Man in the Moon Bounce. There's a very sophisticated message to this episode. Basically, Stan gets a surprisingly relatable midlife crisis, and then runs off to relive his childhood while Steve has to take over as man of the house. He then gets thrown into minimum security prison, where he decides he wants to stay so he doesn't have to take responsibility. The jokes are extremely polished but very subtle in this episode. I also really respect the message to it. It's another one of those really heartwarming episodes that you just rarely see in Seth Sliner's shows. There's also a really nice side plot about Haley offering to cheer up Klaus by doing his haircuts, after she discovers it's the thing he missed most about being human. We see a really compassionate side of Haley in this episode, which is often pushed to the side in order to show what a staunch libertarian she is. With a final twist that will have you chuckling for hours after you finish watching, this is among the best American Dad has to offer. Number 3. Raptures Delight. When American Dad does a Christmas special, they don't stop till they've done the apocalypse. That's my kind of Christmas special. We start this episode with the Rapture. where Francine starts dating Jesus, and we then jump 7 years into the future. We then get a ridiculously heavy change in tone, where we move into post-apocalyptia. Stan has to side with Jesus in the Rapture in order to save Francine from Satan. The change in tone is so dramatic that I kept expecting it to be all a big joke or something, but they take it dead seriously all the way to the end. I never thought when I started watching American Dad I'd see a wicked final duel between Jesus and Satan. But hey, American Dad does it, and it was incredible. I love the creativity of this episode. The art style they use to explain the Rapture, the world they design after the Rapture has happened. This probably has more creativity and ideas in it than any other episode. We get new music that suits the dark atmosphere of the Rapture perfectly, and a switch up in art styles that you won't soon forget. American Dad shows us here they can do serious, and they can do it damn well. A real breath of fresh air. This is among my favorite episodes. And number 2, Spring Breakup. There's a very simple premise for this one. Stan and Francine's marriage is feeling stale, and Roger throws a massive spring break party.
I'm Scotch Bingington, the true king of spring break.
This is one of those episodes that actually feels like a party, and what's nice about it is you actually feel like you're experiencing it right along with Stan as he tries to recapture his partying years. There's a carefree feeling to this episode that perfectly captures how many people feel when they look back on their partying years. While most of my partying years consisted of me cooped up in an anime club or playing Neverwinter Nights by myself, the spring breakup still took me back to a more carefree time in my life and made me really smile. And the side plot of Steve trying to lose his virginity is also really hilarious. A very well-endowed party celebrity begins offering herself to him, and he begins demanding ridiculous standards before he'll make love to her. And the ending is one of the funniest moments in all of American Dad. This episode is a must-see.
I had them removed! They're all real, baby! So come and get it! Yeah!
Oh boy, it's swell to say.
And the number 1 best American Dad episode is Tearjerker.
Ah! What the hell? Wait, you're a gun? I always thought you were like an eyeball or something.
It's essentially everything that makes American Dad what it is, times 10. We start with a massive snow avalanche chase scene at the beginning. And follow through with what I think is the funniest American Dad episode of all. Just the ideas alone in this episode make it the very best American Dad has ever done. I could watch this episode over and over and still laugh at it. In this alternative world, Steve's a scientist whose inventions do nothing but make ladies' cans grow, and Roger is an incredibly bad director supervillain who creates such classics as Bark of the Covenant, Klaus is his henchman, and Francine also plays a secret agent. Every character just fits perfectly into their roles. We jump between awesome openings to casinos to secret island supervillain bases in this episode. Roger's evil plan? To create the world's saddest movie and screen it all over the world in order to make the world cry themselves to death. And I struggle to explain the premise of this one without laughing. This leads to what I think is the funniest scene in all of American Dad. Every single joke in this episode is just a classic. It's not just the most polished American Dad episode. I would say it's one of the most polished animated episodes I've ever seen. I could watch this episode over and over and still laugh at it. If you haven't checked out American Dad before, I recommend you start with this one, as it's, in my opinion, the best American Dad episode ever done. I think American Dad is not just more well-dressed than its frat boy brother Family Guy. It's smarter as well. They actually managed to make us laugh at dark concepts like the disturbing, scary side of America's law enforcement.
¿Quieren comprar unas bocinas?
And the characters are genuinely likable. I'd love to see more of this show. I think it's some of the best work Seth MacFarlane has ever done. Did I miss your favorite episode? If you've got a favorite episode of American Dad yourself, or got a comment, feel free to post them. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.